Well, I'm excited to bring to you yet another wonderful, provocative thought leader, Bryant Galindo, to decoding the conflict mindset. Bryant has done an amazing job through his journey, a graduate of Columbia University, the first in his family of Mexican heritage. And not only was he the first to obtain a graduate degree, he also shares with us the life of hardship he experienced growing up as he did. I'm excited to share with you too that Bryant has authored a book called The New Middle, and it's really all about bringing the heart and the mind together in effectively resolving conflicts and making good, emotionally intelligent decisions. Well, that's what I'm all about, the Mindset Doc. I love working with people about expanding, growing their emotional intelligence, and Bryant helps us do that today in this interview. So don't go away. Stay around. You're going to get a lot, so be ready with pen and paper or your electronic device, whatever that might be. You know, a lot of people are really avoidant when it comes to conflict. They just don't want to deal with it. They'd rather run from it. But there's another way to think about conflict, and that's what Decoding the Conflict Mindset is all about, and particularly our guest speaker today, Bryant Galindo. Because conflict, really, if we reframe how we view conflict, is actually an opportunity to learn and grow, to gain perspective from how other people see things. And so that's what you're going to get today. I'm so excited to have Bryant here today. Welcome, Bryant.
Thank you so much, Debra. I'm really excited about our conversation today.
Oh, absolutely. One of the things that caught my eye, we connected on LinkedIn, and I was intrigued with your new book called The New Middle. And we'll get into that. Don't worry, listeners and viewers. You're going to learn more about Bryant's new book. But before we go there, it's really about navigating disagreements using the HeartMind Connection. And since I do a lot with mindset, of course, those phrases just grabbed my attention and we had to connect. And so it's really, Bryant's going to help us learn how to bring in that mind-heart connection so that we can actually disagree more effectively. What? We want to disagree? Well, you know what? We do anyway. So let's just do it effectively and constructively, right?
Exactly.
Yeah. And so I've been so delighted to learn more about Bryant. He's actually the founder and principal of Collabs HQ LLC, which is a mediation and consulting firm working with business owners, teams, and organizations through those difficult dialogues and negotiations. And so what's interesting is that Bryant started on this journey, right, Bryant? Because you had a near-death experience, leaving you wondering just why.
Exactly. And that near-death experience happened about 6 years ago. I was at a Halloween party out in LA with my then ex-partner, and I ended up getting randomly stabbed in the neck by a stranger that all of a sudden kind of put me in this whirlwind of emotions. Why me? Victimization. And I think the empowerment from all of this, and this is the story that actually starts my book, is that in coming out of that and doing the proverbial, like rising from the ashes, I had to look at myself. I had to look at the patterns of my behaviors, how I communicated, why I maybe called this like situation in, which is something I talk about in the book, because I went up to the guy. I felt the need to like kind of puff up my chest and get in between him and then my ex-partner. And it literally just kind of, I had to just look at myself. And so I had to see not only this trauma, which it was, but also my upbringing and the trauma that kind of created my ego and what I call in my book, my personalization behaviors, the ways I reacted when in conflict, when disagreeing, when communicating. And I had to kind of have some reckoning with self. And thankfully, I found a teacher and a guide here in LA who helped me with that path. And it helped me find my heart again, helped me find a deeper aspect of my humanity. And it's something I talk about in the book, is that what we may call our personality may very well just be our ego trying to protect ourselves, trying to figure out how do we gain, admiration, validation externally, when sometimes we actually need to do that internally for self.
Wow, that was very, very powerful statements right there. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Because, yeah, sometimes, well, I like to say out of adversity comes opportunity,
Mm-hmm.
because sometimes we have to hit a real low or like you, a near death experience or just, experience something tragic before we sort of have that wake up call and go, oh my gosh, what am I doing? And I certainly have not had an experience like yours, Brian. So I'm thankful for that. And I also had my deep low moments back in 2011 after a few years of hardship financially after the recession, but also I went through a series of 5 years where I lost 5 family members due to
Oh,
various
wow.
medical conditions. Yeah, and so it was just like, oh my gosh, I was really like, what else is going to happen here?
Yeah.
And really I'd become very anxious. And so I had to sort of really take stock of what I was doing and et cetera. And actually that was the kicker, shall we say, that got me back to working on my doctoral degree in doing my dissertation. I said, I got to do something for myself and just re-examine life. And so we can have different experiences happen for us, but the outcome is sort of similar or follows similar pathways where we do this own deep self-reflective journey to build personal accountability within, right?
Correct. Yeah. And it's all about that empowering journey, right? Which is what I think even conflict resolution, mediation is all about, is how do we empower ourselves to go through these uncomfortable moments and come out the other side like in a better state.
Yeah, yeah. And as I said in the beginning, a lot of people, would rather run away from conflict. And yet, once they've had a positive experience, and that's why mediation, a structured process, can be so, like you said, empowering because they realize they can get through some difficult times, some differing perceptions, and actually navigate through to calmer water on the other side and actually free themselves up from this burden they've been carrying around, right?
Exactly. Yes. You always get that aha moment afterwards. You're like, oh my gosh, I can breathe. I'm lighter. And I'm like, yes. Yeah.
That's why I always like to say, breathe. How you show up matters. And so some good deep breathing can really sort of settle you back down and create that calmer inner state, right?
Correct. Yep.
Yeah, yeah. So, Bryant, a little bit more about your background. I see that you've got a Master's of Science in Negotiation, Conflict Resolution from Columbia University. Kudos, congratulations.
Thank you.
And as a result, you also have worked with the United Nations, pretty impressive. MUFG Union Bank, and so very national institution, and the University of Phoenix. And so you've done a lot around developing some large scale conflict resolution and communication training programs.
Correct. Yeah. Yeah. I have an interesting kind of background. I would say that I probably have taken myself out of the employee market because of everything I've done. But I think my number one North Star is like, how can I create the large scale impact that I feel I want to do in this world? And how can the skills that I learned at Columbia, as well as in my own personal life, be taught to others? Because every aspect of our life is a communication dance, And so if we can learn this, as I know for myself, I had all of these aha moments when I was going through my graduate education. I was like, why didn't I learn this earlier? Why did no one teach me this? And so if there's ever an opportunity where I can apply that in a way where people can learn, I'm all for it.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I think you and I share that passion then, as far as, educating and influencing and redirecting people to a more constructive mindset about conflict and how it really can make powerful change. But before we go on into some of the questions I want to frame for our listeners and viewers today, I know that you have a very interesting background. And so talk a little bit more about your heritage and your business ventures and what you've been able to accomplish. I think that's incredible.
Oh, thank you so much. So I'm a first generation Mexican American. I'm the first in my family to get a graduate degree because I have an older brother and he went to college. He's the first to get an undergrad degree, but I'm the first to get a graduate degree. And, I came from nothing. I have very humble beginnings, and I would say that that has given me a lens of being able to push through adversity, a lot of grit. But I also didn't know what I didn't know. I remember filling out the FAFSA, right, for my parents because they didn't know how to really do that, navigating like student loans. And so now that my business is about 6 years old, I'm at a place where I'm like, wow, I can just continue building this. I've built out the systems. I'm attracting the ideal clients. Like, I love my work, but it took a lot for me to get here because I didn't have a lot of capital. No one could really help me. And so I've had to really kind of do it like bootstrapping, using the lean startup model in my first 2 years, getting part-time jobs here and there, and just to support myself. And now I'm at a place where I can sustain it. But I really credit just like my background. I'm also a gay man. And so I have these two layers of kind of what you would say is like minority status, but I just see it as something that's empowering because it gives me a different perspective that I can speak to a lot of different ways of being. Because my clients are throughout the world. I've worked, I think, with clients from like 12 different countries, and so my entire business is all virtual. Even before the pandemic, it was all virtual because I was like, I want to be a digital nomad and do that lifestyle. And then now, not so much. but but it's just been a very humbling and rewarding journey. And I think the clients I get to work with, I'm grateful that I get to do the work that I do.
Well, that is fascinating. To see how you've built your business up so quickly in 6 years is a very short period of time, and to have achieved that virtually, and internationally is amazing. I know for me, working virtually, throughout the pandemic, actually created international opportunities, and so. I feel fortunate to have worked with the Hong Kong Institute of Mediation, for example, and then also Mediation Steadfast in Perth, Australia, and going to Paris. Very soon. So, so it's amazing, the opportunities. If we look at things, we could have looked at it as a devastating time of our lives. But out of that, again, came opportunity from adversity. Yeah. So I'm really curious then, your new book, The New Middle, which will now be out in May 2022. Just want to reiterate that one.
Yes.
What is it about? Tell us a little bit more about what that means to you and what it could mean to our listeners and viewers.
Yeah, so the new middle is a roadmap. So it really follows my own journey of not only opening my heart, but balancing an open heart, the sensitivity, the humanness, your courage with your mind, the analytical aspects of discernment, being able to problem solve and not be in a place of fight or flight. And so the new middle is not only a state of being that you create within yourself, so like a new midpoint for you, whatever that may be, and also a place that you find yourself with another person when you're disagreeing. Because I think you can agree with this, is that when we get into arguments or disagreements, most people like to debate. They're about like, how do I prove that I'm right? What is the data I need? Let's keep emotions out of this. But the new middle forces us to look at that, not so much as a way that's negative, but maybe there's a better way of doing it. Maybe there is a way of dialoguing, of not making it so much about right versus wrong, but just understanding for the pure sake of understanding. And so this journey that people take is one that makes them look inward first. So what are the patterns that a person has based upon any trauma that they have had? And I have a very expansive definition of trauma that I use in the book, which is from Dr. Gabor Mador, he released a documentary earlier this year called The Wisdom of Trauma. And his definition was trauma are the things that are done to us that we sit with by ourselves that we don't know what to do with. And it gets locked in our body somehow, right? And I say in the book that if we can track ourselves all the way to those formative years of like 4, right, up until like we become young adults, you see where there's maybe little dings where our trauma gets stuck, and then we create like behavioral patterns, whether that's shutting down or avoiding conflict or feeling like we need to yell and puff ourselves up or getting defensive. And I have the worksheets in the book to help people identify that so they can come inward and then be like, oh, these are my personalization patterns. And this is how my ego or my mind kind of gets triggered to protect me when I am in conflict. And then this is what it looks like when we can quiet that, allow the mind to relax, allow the heart to open, come forward, and then that balancing act between the two, allowing the heart to lead so that the mind can follow and discern appropriately.
Well, it sounds again that we've got a lot of parallels here because, I with my psychology background, of course, taking a look at a lot of the attachment theories and the models for that, as well as the neuroscience of our brain, body behavior. And, and what we know, when I first trained, and with my psychology background, cognitive behavioral was very much the thing. Cognitions drive your behaviors. It was only after that we realized, there's an emotional component in there, and emotions precede all cognitions, and that's why we can't. A totally cognitive decision is not your best decision. A totally emotional decision is not your best decision. It's a balance of that. The thoughts that you have, but looking at the emotions that drive that, and that ties totally into what you said already. That drive to survive, that fight, flight, or freeze mechanism that we all have worldwide, no matter what. And so that's why I love working so much with emotional intelligence to help people develop that awareness and so forth. So I'm looking forward to your book and your worksheets. I've got something similar called My 3 Steps to Mindset Shift. And I'll share your website and mine a little bit later on. So if people wanted to get started on this, they could, because it's a fascinating journey, isn't it? Right.
It is. And I think it's really rewarding. And if someone has the courage to take the journey, because I kind of end the book saying, like, you have to want to do this. You can't just like say, I'm going to read a book and then I got it. No, it's a practice. You have to, as you say, how you show up matters, like literally, the way you show up really does matter. And you have conscious choices you can make. We all will get triggered, right? But can you make the time differential between the triggered to the responsive state shorter over time? So let's say once it took you 2 days to then go and try to get into dialogue mode, and now it takes you 2 hours, that's growth. And I think in our kind of quest to go in our society, hustler mentality, always producing, we forget about those golden moments where we can actually be in silence, in our heart, not be so stressed out. And then remember, oh, wow, our body actually knows this like calm state. And conflict, even if it triggers you, doesn't necessarily mean you have to go into overdrive, but you can self-modulate.
Yeah. Well, those moments of self-reflection, what's going on here and where am I feeling it? And so I like to say being in the quiet of the moment, just to take stock of where you are. And so I have a little technique, a video on it called the 3 Bs. Be in the moment, breathe through the moment, and then break free from the moment with a vision for how you want to show up. So, this is fascinating. So I'd love to hear your definition of the heart-mind connection.
Ooh, okay, yes, definitely. So I think I kind of already mentioned it. It's a little long-winded. I would say, first, let me start out with a story that I was just reading that has been made now into my book, which is they took 2 different heart cells of 2 different patients and put it in a petri dish. And what they found was that they started beating at the same rate. So even though these 2 like heart cells did not like know each other, right, there was a coherence that was established. And I thought that was really powerful because I think we all try to connect from up here, right? Like we're like, oh, let's just, if you ever go to a networking event or you're small talking, right, you're just trying to find some areas where you can connect. But I love that story because it helps us connect from our hearts, right? What if our hearts actually synchronized? Like, what would that look like? And it might sound a little woo-woo, but it also is, I think, to me, what is the heart-mind connection definition is that with an open heart, can you speak with your mind in such a way that allows the mind's discernment to also be impacted by the heart's feeling and vice versa? So a lot of the definitions that I push out in the book, I feel like I'm creating like different words or phrases to kind of encapsulate what it is I'm trying to like bring through, because the book is also a collection of a psychology, conflict resolution, and spirituality. So it has these 3 themes that I think sometimes don't speak to one another, but I think can and should. because it helps us get to those underground wounds that sometimes keep us stuck, that can also help be our empowerment when we are in these places of adversity and when we have to really be like, wow, what's real for us? Mm-hmm. Is it this patterning that I've had since I was 16, or is it the conscious choice I'm making at 35 to do something different?
Right. When I love your story about the petri dish, I had not heard that before. But it really is, like you say, synchronicity, and I like to call connection. Even finding out something we have in common with somebody. Oh, you've had that experience too. I have too. What was that like for you? I mean, a conversation naturally flows, and you feel connection. And I, particularly in the workplace, I talk about how important it is to start your day off with a smile and a connection. Because then when conflict comes later, it's much easier to go back to that person because you've already had that connection.
Correct.
It's harder to come to somebody in conflict when you feel distant and separate. And so making that connection becomes really, really powerful and paves the way for good conversations.
Definitely. I always say it's like social capital, right? You're like kind of putting some money in the bank. So when things get rough, you're like, oh, okay, let's withdraw some of that social capital so we can bank on the trust. Yeah.
So building on that, building your social bank net worth up, one of your key elements to your message was building that heart-mind connection so you can actually disagree more effectively. I got to ask you to say more about that.
Yeah, of course. And so the book is structured in 4 different parts. The first part is on trauma, our upbringing, and how that creates our personalization patterns. The second section is how to use the mind safely in a disagreement. And so when it's not in a triggered state, what does communication that's grounded look like? Section 4 is on our heart patterns. Why do we close our heart? How do we keep it open? And what does that look like for managing dual realities? So once you're able to understand it, what your open heart feels like, then you can start to hear what are those underlying needs that someone has. So if they're being disrespectful to you, is it because they're being unacknowledged? And if they're trying to criticize you, are they really just trying to criticize themselves? Is that the words that they're actually saying internally to themselves that's being externalized? And so section 4 is the synthesis of the book, which is with all of that information primed in you, how do you use a framework that I put in the book on understanding someone, dialoguing to move things forward, and then using solutions to kind of bring it all together. You need all 3. And so if you're going to effectively use the heart-mind connection, you have to be willing to understand someone's perspective. You can't just say, I disagree with you, so that means I hate you, which is, I think, our current environment. You have to be yes, exactly. You have to be willing to dialogue about the heart, like the hard issues, listen, and then come up with some solutions, whatever that looks like. And it sounds simple, but in some of the stories, because I pour a lot of myself into the book, I talk about stories from not only my professional practice, but also my personal life, where I had to disagree with ex-partners, mentors, just people in my life to show that tension. Like this isn't easy. And as you're doing this work, you will see, oh, there's a trigger. Oh, there's a pattern. Oh, how am I going to show up here? And you have to be willing to choose something different so that over time, like the neuroplasticity in your brain shifts so that you have new neurons firing, new behavioral patterns, and then you basically redo yourself as a whole.
Yeah. Well, I thank you for your in-depth overview of that, because that really resonates for me. And I know that you were my guest at a recent presentation. And so you might remember I talked about the 9 common triggers to emotional reactions. And so you touched on a couple of them already, that sense of rejection or not being accepted, and so if we are aware of these things, then we can use this as information to look at what's happening differently. And so that's part of my book coming out, but I don't have a publication date yet. But, that's what I try to bring to, my world of influence, is to help people recognize some easy tools, some easy frameworks that we can use to, how do we look at this? You said something early on, Bryant, about, our personalities, and there are many layers to our personality, that it's really about developing competency about those different layers and gaining insight and knowledge and awareness rather than keeping it as a closed book, and like I said earlier, it's getting excited and curious about what can I learn and understand about somebody else's perspective rather than defending my position against you. And you said that earlier too, is that so often we get into defending ourselves rather than, well, help me understand where you're coming from.
Correct.
What influences your perspective on that? Yeah. And so what do you think gets in the way or hinders us in being able to use the heart-mind connection more? What do people fear? What do people not know? Just what gets in the way?
I would say across the board are fear, no matter what that is. And fear transposed onto our ego, that little voice inside of our mind that is creating fear-based thoughts. One of the tools that I talk about in the book is the conflict cycle of unresolved trauma. And towards the end of that cycle, you see how our patterning and our wounds start to feed one another. So the story we develop about someone triggers that wound, and it almost becomes like a cycle where you're self-confirming this fear of yours. It's one of the techniques that I use in my mediations with clients. Is called the name, the fears, and judgment technique. And I think it's a really powerful technique because a lot of times my clients, so my target market is anywhere between 28 to 40-year-olds, and obviously startup founders, venture backed. And these are individuals that don't have a stigma around mental health. So a lot of them will be like, oh yeah, I have a therapist on retainer. I'm like, oh, perfect. So this language, and so we're like, yes, that's, because they're very growth oriented and they understand, look, we have blind spots, we need help. And so I always ask them in our sessions when I need to use this technique, please lean into courageous self-awareness right now, and I need you to kind of really be in that space. And I'm going to ask you, I want you to name a fear that you have about this situation, about your co-founder, about anything, right? And then I want you to name a judgment you have about your business partner. And then I ask them to write it down, and I don't force them to share, but I'm like, look, I think it would be really beneficial for you all to share this right now. You obviously have paid a lot of money for me to be here. I'm holding the space for you. So why not lean into it? But if you don't want to, I'm not going to force you. Yeah. I've never had anyone say no. So I'm really happy about that. And usually what you see is that someone's fear is triggering the other person's judgment and vice versa. And so what I find is that this creates a little bit of vulnerability and empathy that then gets people to get outside of their heads and into their hearts to be like, oh, wow, while we might be arguing over equity around this startup or who gets what and this disillusion, we're also seeing that, wow, we're humans, and what we're fighting about is actually very similar and we're triggering one another. So it kind of begets a little bit of that aha moment so that they don't get so stuck in their minds and we can get through the impasse.
Yeah. That's remarkable. You triggered a thought. I just used it in a class I taught earlier today, and unfortunately I'm not remembering the author of it, but there's a tendency that we judge others by their behaviors and what they say, but we justify our own behaviors based on our intent. And so I've got this whole model too about using an iceberg and diving below the waterline to get more into intent around beliefs and expectations and assumptions or attitudes, concerns and hopes, as well as our fears, values and needs. Yeah. And I'm going to share, you probably have heard this. I've been told that it's Zig Ziglar, the famous person in sales, called fear nothing more than false evidence appearing real. So it's important, like you said, to stop and say, what fear do I have that maybe isn't really there, but I think it might happen.
It's there. Yes. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So huge. So I'm curious then, both you and I work in the workspace on in different levels and so forth. And, I do a lot around leadership development. So I'm really curious to hear from you about how can leaders embrace or use this heart-mind connection to, navigate forward as we continue to emerge from this COVID-impacted work world.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of talk about the Great Resignation, right? And I like to reframe it as the great opportunity, because I think for both the employers who I understand are having a hard time finding people to work at a price point that works for their bottom line. I get that as a business owner, but it's also a rebalancing of the scales, as I like to say. And the great opportunity allows us all to kind of take a pause, reset, and see what we want to take into the future. And so for leaders who want to utilize the heart-mind connection, it's literally about acknowledging that, the humanity of the situation that we're in, so that as they're negotiating change or they're trying to kind of work with a distributed team, since a lot of my clients are distributed, what you see is that the screen can be either very helpful or a hindrance. It's your perspective on it. And it doesn't mean that a screen like disconnects you from people. It can actually bridge connection if you use it intentionally. And so the heart-mind connection can still work here too. Like I've seen it in the mediations that I do or the coaching that I do. So if leaders want to be able to lean into this, it's literally about bringing your humanity to the table and allowing your employees to also meet you there too.
Yeah. Well, I really love that. And I'm anxious to see your book coming out, because I can think of a lot of leaders I'd want to share that with. Yeah, and that there was just an article I read about how e-mediation, really can be a powerful tool in our emerging world from COVID. As more workplaces remain hybrid, employees are either on site or remote or a combination thereof, and it's it's sort of a safe way of bringing people together who are in conflict, and yet create some physical and psychological safety around the virtual environment. And
Correct.
so
Yeah.
I see, I've seen it be powerfully effective over, the number of months that we've been navigating, through the COVID world. And, when we said, hey, see you in 2 weeks when this thing settles down, and now it's approach 2 years,
Yeah.
So, it's a very different world out there. And I think from all that I've read and seen and talked with people too, is that, what we've gone through on many fronts, not just COVID, but the social unrest, the political unrest and so forth, has really been a wake-up call to leaders saying, we can't continue doing business the way we've been doing it. We have to be innovative and creative and re-examine just how are we working, and when, where, and how are we working, and looking at the benefits of different approaches. And that's really what conflict resolution is about, right? Looking at different approaches, different perspectives, and saying, okay, how can we create and craft a whole new world?
Exactly.
Yep. Yeah. And Bryant, I'm just so delighted that we've had a chance to meet, and I hope that our worlds continue to connect and intersect and collaborate. And you've got a powerful message, and thank you for bringing it to the world.
Thank you so much, Debra. I really enjoyed our conversation.
Great. So it's all about decoding the conflict mindset. So Bryant's a great resource with his book coming forth about how to do that, and doing that courageously and curiously.
Yes.
Kinds of ways. Yeah. So to our viewers and listeners, I want to just say thank you for being here with us. And if you enjoyed this, please don't keep it to yourself. Share, subscribe, pass it on, and particularly this great interview with Bryant, and because it has so many powerful messages for us at work and at home in whatever pathway we might go. So decoding the conflict mindset, our next skill set, our next mindset for making the world a healthier and happier place. One conversation at a time, right, Bryant?
Yes, exactly.
So thank you again. Well, I hope you just enjoyed what Bryant Galindo brought to us in terms of the new middle, how to see through things differently and the difference it made. And I'm just as excited to bring to you our next guest speaker. And so if you haven't already subscribed, do so now, because you will not want to miss Sylvia Mayer. Sylvia comes with a great wealth of experience as a lawyer, a mediator, an arbitrator, and she has some keen insights about how to help people push through to the path to resolution. Come and listen, learn about our ABC approach to connection in mediation. Don't miss out. Again, subscribe, share it out with your social media, invite others to join us.